Hello everybody, welcome to the county seat. Sit down, stand by, we're going to have a good conversation today. We are going to talk about the boogeyman in the room, property tax. Something nobody likes, but it's different in Utah because of a law called Truth in Taxation, and that's what our discussion about is today. So we are going to start with a primer on Truth in Taxation, and for that we go right now to Derek Dowsett.
No one likes taxes to any degree, but the property tax is probably the most loathed. But as far as taxes go, it is one of the more fair, equitable, and accurate forms of taxation. The offices of the assessor, auditor, commission, and treasurer make up the checks and balances within the county to make sure it stays that way. Property tax is often misunderstood. It isn't the county property tax, it is the county property tax bill. You see, the county collects taxes for all of the local entities. So even when a county doesn't raise taxes, but a city or school district does, they still feel the ire of the citizens. Generally, about half of the property tax goes to the local school districts, and the remaining half is further divvied up among the county, city, and special service districts. Those dollars go towards resources to keep the community safe, building and maintaining infrastructure, like roads, as well as many amenities like parks and keeping pesky mosquitoes at bay. Recent headlines have focused on a handful of communities that are seeing budget increases this year. Those proposed increases by elected officials begin a process known as Truth in Taxation. Prior to 1985, if there was a large shift in property values, the local government could either have a windfall of revenue when values rose, or there would be a budget shortfall if the property values fell. The effect was local governments didn't have a stable revenue source to create a budget from. There was also no protection to the taxpayer from an ever-rising tax burden. This prompted a conversation among the Utah Taxpayers Association, Tax Commission, and the Utah Association of Counties to come up with a more dependable tax policy. What we got was Truth in Taxation. Under Truth in Taxation, revenue is limited to the previous year's budget, plus any new growth within a county. If there is a need to raise the budget, the county has to engage in a Truth in Taxation hearing and notification process with the public. The idea being that elected officials would think twice about raising taxes, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Truth in Taxation made the property tax more stable because it focused on revenue rather than the rate. When property values go up, the rate goes down. And when property values fall, the rate goes up because the budget stays the same as the previous year, plus any new growth within the county. It is the rate that changes. The stability of the property tax due to Truth in Taxation is best demonstrated by the recent recession. Income and sales taxes followed the trends of a down economy, while the property tax held its own. The large shifts in property taxes and revenue of decades past have since smoothed out, and local governments have a more stable source of revenue to budget from. Citizens have the peace of mind and transparency that local governments can't raise taxes without holding public meetings and going through the Truth in Taxation process. However, there is a sentiment by some that Truth in Taxation has worked too well. Some communities hesitate to raise taxes even as costs to the county from vendors have increased. Eventually, the budget gets stretched too thin, and local government has to go through the process, usually resulting in a major tax hike. But the question remains, is the issue with the law, or does it have more to do with the elected leaders not wanting to be held responsible for raising taxes? We'll dive into the details in our roundtable. Chad?
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate that report. We'll get into the details of Truth in Taxation. I've got a lot of questions because I don't think I fully understand it. We'll be right back on the county seat. Welcome back to the county seat. Our discussion today is about Truth in Taxation, a unique Utah phenomenon. Joining us for our conversation is Howard Stevenson, who's the president of the Utah Taxpayers Association. We also have Ricky Hatch, who is the clerk auditor of Weber County, and I might add, the first vice president of the Utah Association of Counties. And we have Sean Milne, commissioner extraordinaire from Tooele County. Thank you all for joining us. So I want to start the conversation by just finding out a little bit about the genesis. From Derek's story, we kind of got an understanding of what truth in taxation is. How did it get here?
Other states basically go back to the well repeatedly for the property tax as a budget balancer for local governments mainly. But in Utah, we put in 1985 the Truth in Taxation law in place, which says you can get last year's revenue plus new growth. And if you want to do more than that, and there's no prevention of you doing more than that, you have to do it very transparently by publishing notice to every single taxpayer, a mailed notice that they can see precisely what the proposal will do to their own property taxes. You hold a hearing, and then you're unlimited. The governing body is unlimited in what they can do, as long as they have given forewarning and had the hearing.
So is this entity specific? Because as we pointed out, school boards, special service districts, as well as municipalities and counties all show up on that county tax bill. I know in Salt Lake County here, it's about this long.
Right.
And so there's a lot of different people that I'm paying taxes to. Is it the responsibility of the county only for truth in taxation, or does each entity do their own?
Every entity that has the authority to impose the property tax also has the opportunity to exceed the certified rate, last year's revenue plus new growth, if they want to, but they have to issue the notice, which is handled by the counties. And that's where their role comes in, is in being the bearer of bad news. So many people blame the county for all of their property tax bill, when in fact, counties only get 15% or so. The school districts get more than 50%, as was noted by Derek.
Yeah, so Sean, and I want to really be clear on this. When there's truth in taxation in Tooele County, are you the one that has to hold the hearing on behalf of the school board, or is it just your office that sends out the notice?
Actually, I think Ricky can answer that better with this teaser. Okay. We would only hold it for those entities that we have specific authority over. So the school district, no.
For the county and entities that the county has jurisdiction over,
right.
Yeah, the county would have to hold that. Weber County collects taxes on behalf of 91 entities.
But wow, I thought mine were big.
But only about 6 of those entities really would, if there was truth in taxation, that the county would have to conduct that hearing. The rest of them
but
have to
you
do
notice it for all the other entities as well.
Correct. It goes out on the truth in taxation notice, the property valuation notice in July. We have to provide the date and time and what the impact would be if that property tax increase that was proposed actually passes.
And this month, if counties are wanting to exceed the certified rate, the notice is sent with the property tax notice as an addendum to that. So you may have gotten an extra sheet in your property tax notice that told you the date, time of the hearing. So Salt Lake County is holding one, Utah County is holding one.
So in addition to clearing that, there's an important nuance there too, because most folks perceive that the notice they'd get right now would be for this calendar year. Counties operate on the same as a calendar year, but it would actually be for a tax proposed in the next year. So if Tooele County, for example, sent out a truth in taxation notice, it would actually be for something that would be collected in November of 2020.
Right.
When the next property tax bill comes due, and we would hold those hearings next year, not right now.
You pay your property tax at the end of the year, not the beginning.
Yep.
So we kind of have an idea that the valuation can float wherever it wants, but the revenue that the entity takes in remains the same. How has that stacked up? Has that hurt the ranking of Utah by doing it so much differently, or has it, how does it compare to other states as far as how well the truth in taxation system has worked?
When we started this in 1985, the law passed in 85 and took effect in 86, Utah was ranked 24th highest in property taxes compared to personal income. Now we are 36th highest. And that doesn't mean that taxing entities have been starved, because even with that, the revenues, property tax revenues, have grown faster than population and inflation combined by about 46% faster than population and inflation. So it hasn't starved local governments. A lot of the reason for it growing faster is that they have gone through truth in taxation to increase it above the last year's amount plus new growth, but also because new growth in the fastest growing state in the nation, Utah, has been much faster than inflation. And so local entities, especially the urban counties, they have a lot more revenue just from new growth, but not so much in Wayne or Daggett or these small counties.
And that kind of leads to a couple of questions. I think we'll take a break and point to some of the conversations that come up on the street corner, and particularly in rural Utah, about truth in taxation and some of the challenges. We'll be right back on the County Seat. Welcome back to the County Seat. We're talking about truth in taxation, a system that is in place in Utah for how property taxes are assessed each year. You know, Howard, you talked about the fact that property taxes still, because of truth in taxation, has been able to grow, and you attribute a lot of it to new growth. So one might listen to what you just said and say, okay, so new growth in a county covers the inflationary impacts of things, and that new growth makes up that spread. So new growth being like new businesses, new buildings, new stuff that wasn't on the tax rolls last year, that's the new growth, right?
And recently that has been faster than inflation.
Okay, but a rural county might argue, along with that growth comes more services required, because you'll have that new growth. You've got to pave new streets or maintain them. You've got new infrastructure. There's more pressure on the sewer and sanitation system, and so some of that inflationary factor that you were hoping would cover the fact that a ton of asphalt is more expensive than it was last year, and the costs of counties keep going up. It's not all covered in that new growth, because that new growth is consuming more services. So how do you address that? How do any of you address that? Did I just stick a stick in a hornet's nest here?
Well, I think the way that's addressed is you step out and you say we've got to increase our rate. Our new growth is not covering the additional services that come because of the new growth, on top of the additional increase in costs, the inflation. And so you have to step out and say, and plead your case and demonstrate to the public, this is why we're increasing the taxes. And that's a tall order. And the public, understandably so, many of them are on fixed income, and you hear a tax increase and you just want to kick the bums out because all they want is more money. And there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes before anyone even comes close to making that decision. And we know it's painful, and it should be a little bit painful, to be honest, or else everyone would do it and would be like a lot of the other states. And so you just have to make the hard decisions and say we're going to increase taxes.
I know both of you guys want to say something, because sure do. Your turn first, and then you, Howard.
Admittedly, and I think this needs to be said right at the onset, county commissioners or any elected official, whether it's a school board, your special service district, mosquito abatement, wherever, none of us run, especially here in Utah, none of us ever run with the idea that, I'm going to go into office and be a tax increaser. Like, none of us, right? Because we all know that's death. And yet the irony is, it's not until after you get in the job, no matter what you said as a candidate, a hopeful, to be one day elected official, you start to realize things are a little bit differently run than what you thought they were when you were the candidate. And I think that's really reflective of the human condition. I don't want to wax too philosophical here, but humans love to take complex issues and want to boil them down as if they're black and white. And this is one of those topics that is very convoluted. It is very troublesome, because what I love that Howard has said is he's used a very generalized statement as if to say, well, it's grown at 46%. Well, okay, that's great, but not all things have risen in cost equally. A pound of flour over a 10-year period or since 1985 has not grown up at the same rate in price as a gallon of oil or that barrel of oil that goes into asphalt. And so there's a really disproportionate way to try to boil down the complexities of commodities down to a simple formula, and it doesn't work quite that way. And we also, as taxpayers, because every single one of us here is a taxpayer, and even if we're an elected official for a short period of time, we are still a taxpayer. Things progress. And since 1985, we as Americans, and certainly as Utahns, have asked our local governments to provide more than they did by either departments. I mean, IT departments didn't exist back then, right? And today they're every bit as critical as a roads department. But we have a gas tax to at least help to offset some of the road department costs. We have nothing for IT, right? We expect more from law enforcement than we did in 1980s.
But then that is a case that you can rationalize in Truth and Taxation.
And in fact, the Taxpayers Association has said from the very outset that every 5 to 8 years, these governing bodies need to exceed the certified rate. They need to go through the public hearing process. And oftentimes we will show up at those hearings and explain to the voters that they are justified. In fact, we just met with Utah County today about their 100% increase proposal, and we're going to be telling the citizens that we don't think it should be 100%, but here's what they can actually justify, because they haven't gone through this process since it started, and previous commissions haven't stepped up and have left the existing commission with a problem. So we will be supporting them, and we'll say, public, they're doing the right thing. The other thing that we find is that when you get the community agitators in the room to get it out of their system, and then to hear the justification for why this additional revenue is needed, many times and most often, they will leave that room saying, you know, those commissioners, that school board, that city council, they're a lot smarter than I thought they were. They've got serious issues they're dealing with, and now I finally understand them.
Okay.
I don't hear from those folks very often. I'd like to be on that list, but I mean, it is a good point. Like Truth and Taxation, there isn't a county official anywhere in the state that wants to avoid it on the basic premise of being transparent to the public they serve, right? And we owe that to folks if we're going to tell them why something costs more. And folks ought to hear, as a consumer of services, they ought to hear, if you're asking for this, here is the but for. It's going to cost you more money, right? Like your current tax service gives you the current level of service, your current tax load.
Right.
And if you want an IT department and you expect email communications or expensive software suites that are used by different offices, and you expect your whatever entity that's a governmental service to be modernized, you're going to have to expect that it's going to cost you more. The challenge is, and I really appreciate how Howard has already couched this caveat, is that it's one thing to say, and I appreciate that you gave this, that in the urbanized area, new growth has exceeded inflationary losses. The problem becomes that even inflationary losses should, I believe, be as equitable for counties or school districts, special service districts that live off property tax, as it is that state legislators have done for themselves. They've given through the income tax and sales tax. If the sales tax as a rate, a percentage, were to just stay the same over the years, even though it's increased, if it were to have stayed the same over the years, like none of us are doing the same job as our predecessor 20 years ago. Wage inflation has been real, but the same percentage would quantifiably yield more money, which would help you keep up with inflation. The problem is property tax doesn't have that. So even if, and to the point of Utah County, those folks, those county commissioners before, kicked the can down the road because if they were to have adjusted for inflation, they would have been improperly, in my view, labeled a tax increaser.
Okay, and that leads to a good point. I also realize that we've gone way over, so we've got to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back, and we'll talk about maybe some fine-tuning to the system. We'll be right back on the county seat. Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about truth and taxation. Sean, you kind of alluded to a point, and I want to ask you, as the master, Howard, of this whole concept, is there not a way that perhaps this could be modified a little bit? Now, I'm just speaking as an armchair taxpayer. Couldn't there be a way to include in there some kind of indexing to cost of living increases, so that it could they wouldn't have to go through a hearing every single year like Wayne County does?
If this were a limit on an elected body's ability to increase property taxes, I would say you're right. But it is not a limit. It just says they have to do it in the sunshine. That's all it is. And so I don't know why you would build automatic increases. In fact, what we've looked at is if you built inflation into the law, it would gut the whole thing. And right now, Senate President Stuart Adams and Senator Deidre Henderson have made Utah's law model legislation for the rest of the nation in the American Legislative Exchange Council. They're looking to adopt Utah's law, and I would hate to see us gut it while they're looking to implement it.
But the challenge is that's great for legislators that are in an area that's urbanized and new growth exceeds inflation, but that's not true for all of us. And so I hear this common paradigm that's thrown out at school districts that we treat all children the same for their level of education or the way that they're taught. We're treating all 29 Utah counties the same when we're not. I don't know. I think there's a better way that we can go about it, even if it makes the formula more complex.
And I wish we had time to explore some of that and debate it right here, but we don't. And so we do want to thank you for coming. You'll have to come back. We'll have to pick this up and have yet another episode about truth and taxation. This is fascinating. Thank you very much for inviting us into your home each week for the county seat. Remember that this is on social media. You can go to our YouTube channel. You can watch this again. If you missed something or you want to share it with a friend, please do. We also are available in a podcast, and we are also on Facebook. So follow us and like us. It helps spread the word, and we'll look for you next week on the county seat.